Writes in to say what the world saw yesterday was real commemoration, real celebration, real respect, and the real United Kingdom.
Chris says for a moment the alleged squabbles over uniforms seemed unworthy. The saga over insignia and irrelevance in Westminster Abbey, which has borne witness to truly momentous chapters in Britain's history. Reports of the vanity of Prince Andrew and Prince Harry were reduced to mere petty detail.
All opinion is there and all opinion is welcome. You're watching GB News TV and radio. Do keep getting in touch with us. You can either do it by gbviews@gbnews.uk or you can tweet Gloria or tweet me or tweet at GB News.
And we'll be reading more of your thoughts out, so do continue to get in touch. But that's us for the first hour. In the next hour, we'll be talking about the Prime Minister's trip to New York for the UN General Assembly and the challenges she faces this week on the domestic front as the cost of living. Still with us, those rocketing bills still there. First, it's your weather.
Hello. Quite a lot of cloud around for many of us over the next couple of days. There will be some breaks in the cloud, allowing a little brightness to come through at times, but for the majority of us, it is a dry-looking picture, and that's all thanks to this large area of high pressure dominating the weather across much of the UK, both today and through much of the rest of the week. But there is a change coming. This weather front, which is bringing thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain to the far north and northwest of Scotland, will eventually make progress southeastwards, but not until the latter part of the week. Until then, it's a largely dry picture, quite a lot of cloud around for many of us, and that cloud just about thick enough to produce a few light drizzly showers here and there, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And as I mentioned, there will be some breaks in the cloud at times, so a little bit of brightness here and there. And it's more of the same through this evening and overnight. Still a good deal of cloud around, still a largely dry picture, just some more persistent rain at times for the far northwest of Scotland. And actually that cloud might break up a little bit overnight tonight, but it will be a mild one. Temperatures for most of us remaining in double figures. And we could see a little bit of mist and fog developing, particularly so across parts of East Anglia and the south east of England. And that will be with us first thing tomorrow morning, eventually melting away once the sunshine gets going. But then for most of us, after a fairly bright start for many, will start to cloud over once again as the day progresses. Temperatures generally high teens or just about nudging into the low 20s, so fairly pleasant.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel,
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And
claimed they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was the result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detective's claims. The McCanns say they only took action to protect the search for their daughter. Around 6 million people with disabilities will receive an automatic one-off payment of £150 today. The majority of eligible people can expect the financial boost by the start of October. Work and Pensions Secretary Chloe Smith says the payment is part of a support package to help those struggling with the cost of living crisis.
We acknowledge that these are worrying times for households, and in particular for disabled people who do, of course, face additional costs. We understand that, and that's why we're acting. So the government has made sure that there is at least £1,200 of support going to the most vulnerable households. The payments we're talking about this week will be arriving automatically, which I hope again is some reassurance to people. And that is in addition to what we're now setting out to support people with the costs of energy.
A coroner has offered his deepest sympathies to the family of Molly Russell, who took her own life after watching content on social media which raised concerns. The 14-year-old looked at tens of thousands of online posts before she died in November 2017, including material which was linked to anxiety, depression and self-harm. An inquest which reopened this morning will consider whether algorithms contributed to her death. Culture Secretary Michelle Donnellan says legislation is being brought forward to tighten internet safety.
We've heard some horrific stories of people accessing suicide forums, of getting content on social media groups that is drastically inappropriate for their age group, and it can have devastating consequences because it can influence young people and children who are not of an age that should be looking at that content. And this government is responsible, decisive, and that's why we're going to bring forward this legislation to protect children and young people under the age of 18.
Police investigating the disappearance of a 70-year-old woman are offering a £20,000 reward. Norma Girolami from Highgate in North London was last seen last summer. The Met Police says she took a train from Barking to Leigh-on-Sea and back again in August, but wasn't heard from again. A man has been charged with her murder and is currently in custody awaiting trial. Train drivers at 12 companies will stage fresh walkouts next month, coinciding with the Conservative Party conference. Members of ASLEF Union, which includes Avanti West Coast, Greater Anglia and South Eastern, will strike on the 1st and 5th of October. The action could severely disrupt travel plans for those hoping to attend the conference in Birmingham. ASLEF says its members are refusing to accept a real terms pay cut with the rising cost of inflation. A man who murdered his wife almost 40 years ago will become the first prisoner to have a public parole board hearing. Russell Causley killed Carol Packman in 1985, but has never revealed where he hid her body. His grandson applied for the hearing to be made public. He hopes it will help ensure that killers who refuse to reveal where their victims are buried stay behind bars. The new Justice Secretary is set to meet with striking barristers for the first time since they walked out over pay. Brandon Lewis will sit down with the Criminal Bar Association, something his predecessor Dominic Raab had refused to do during the strike. Criminal barristers are due to receive a 15% pay rise from the end of this month, but they argue it will only apply to new cases and not those sitting in the backlog. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, back to Alistair and Gloria.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. With Queen Elizabeth II's state funeral over, attention has turned back to our new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and the underlying cost of living crisis. Truss is in New York for the United Nations General Assembly, where she will be seeking to make her mark as Prime Minister on the world stage.
Later this week, the government shares more on their plans to help businesses with their rising energy bills. And on Friday, a mini-budget will be announced outlining how the government will deliver their plan for economic growth. A big week of politics continues as the Labour Party gathers next week for their annual conference in Liverpool, and then the Conservatives the week after meet for their own annual conference the following week.
Well, GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood is live for us in Westminster now to tell us more about what we can expect over the coming week, both from government and indeed from opposition parties as they form up ranks again to rejoin the fray.
Yes, it's all suddenly back with a bang. It feels like politics, or at least normal politics, was suspended quite rightly for the 10 days of official mourning that this country went through. Indeed, potentially more than 10 days, because we'll remember back to that Thursday afternoon when that statement was being made, Liz Truss announcing the freezing of energy bills for households and for businesses. Suddenly, the Commons went into a bit of confusion, notes being passed round, and a few hours later the country learning of the sad passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Now, there had been a plan to perform a policy blitz in the first week of Liz Truss's premiership. That obviously was ground to a halt, but the attempt of Number 10 is to now bring it back into action with announcements every single day this week. And we're expecting, of course, that to culminate in the biggest announcement, that mini-budget on Friday, subject to a programme motion of the House of Commons allowing for this unusual Friday sitting of the House. We're expecting, if that all goes through, and it should, the government still has a large majority in the House of Commons, if that all goes through, we're expecting Friday morning to be the culmination of this week of announcements, which includes on Thursday an announcement on the NHS, how it will deal with its backlog and winter crisis. Tomorrow, on Wednesday, an announcement for businesses and indeed households in Northern Ireland, how the energy price cap is going to be extended to them. But also, of course, Friday, the big plan from those promises that Liz Truss made over the summer, reversing the national insurance increase, cancelling the corporation tax rise, and perhaps some other rabbits out of various hats.
Be trouble brewing. Apologies if you haven't yet seen this story. At 3:03, it appeared on the Press Association. The Conservative chairman of the Treasury Committee has demanded an OBR forecast alongside that mini-budget on Friday. He was an ally of Rishi Sunak in the leadership contest. This is problematic, Tom, isn't it?
Yes, it's a challenge. Mel Stride is a respected figure in the Commons, of course, the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee. Now, what Number 10 say about this issue is that it takes 10 weeks for the Office of Budget Responsibility to produce that companion document to a full budget. That's why this isn't a full budget on Friday, because it is the desire of the government to get it done very, very quickly. They haven't requested that companion document from the OBR because they say it would be an inferior assessment if it isn't done over the full 10 weeks. The forecasts and the assessments within it, according to Number 10, would not be accurate enough. It would not be as legitimate a document as you would see with a normal budget. What Number 10 said to me this morning is that they will be requesting a document of that kind from the OBR this fiscal year, just not this month. So that could be coming any time in the next 6 months or so. Now, to many people, no doubt to Mel Stride, that won't be good enough because there'll be significant tax changes. There have already been significant spending announcements. But Number 10 sticking to the line that getting the OBR to do something in such a short space of time just wouldn't cut the mustard in terms of being a proper assessment of the country's finances, committing instead to having one done this fiscal year.
Interestingly, as you both rightly point out, that Mel Stride is indeed a Tory, but is chair, therefore independent of that Treasury Select Committee. Liz Truss said that she would tear up the Treasury orthodoxy as Prime Minister, but would retain independence for the Bank of England over setting interest rates. The idea of, what was it you called it earlier, unashamedly pro-growth is going to get a shot below the waterline on Thursday. Liam Halligan was telling us within the last hour, interest rates 99.9 recurring % likely to be going up.
Yes, this is almost an inevitability in the minds of economists. However, having interviewed a number of economists who were more supportive of the Liz Truss plan during her leadership campaign, to some extent many of these people, Patrick Minford and the like, would say that a looser fiscal policy combined with a tighter monetary policy, so that's perhaps tax cuts or spending increases combined with higher interest rates, is actually the policy mix that is necessary right now, allowing the Bank of England to do its job controlling inflation while allowing the Treasury to do its job getting people through the cost of living crisis. That's what some economists have been arguing is the policy mix. Julian Jessup, Gerard Lyons, these sorts of people have been saying that that is a route that the government should be pursuing, and an independent Bank of England you would expect to respond to a fiscal loosening, perhaps with monetary tightening, if they're going to follow their mandate to lower inflation. But yes, it does cause problems, particularly for people with mortgages. Those costs will go up. The gamble, I suppose, of this administration is that the pro-growth measures from this Number 10, of having a slightly looser fiscal policy, of going for those tax cuts, will generate growth, not just tax cuts, I should say, but also supply-side reform, perhaps investment zones that we've been hearing a little bit about, parts of the country that will have lower regulation and lower taxes to try and spur economic development in certain areas. It is perhaps the argument of this Number 10 that growth will offset the potential interest rate rises.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. Up to date and on the money as always. Tom Harwood, thank you very much indeed.
Now, Prime Minister Liz Truss has admitted that a new trade deal with the United States is unlikely in the short to medium term.
I'm so sorry.
No, Alistair.
No.
We share. The UK government had promised previously that the UK would have a post-Brexit trade deal with the US by 2022.
Repeated apologies. With that admission comes the Prime Minister being in New York for the United Nations General Assembly, where, of course, she will be meeting with US President Joe Biden. Back home, Labour have said that the lack of a trade deal with the United States, and I quote, is costing billions in lost potential trade opportunities and holding back growth.
Well, we can now speak to Shadow Trade Secretary Nick Thomas Simmons. Nick, I want to ask you about that trade deal in a second, but first of all, can I just put to you, today disabled people have received help with their payments. Tomorrow, businesses will get help with their energy costs, and on Friday, we're all getting tax cuts. What's not to like?
Well, I'm afraid that your last interview, which I heard from Tom Harwood, set out certainly what one of the problems is here. It appears that Liz Truss is going to borrow to fund her plans. The government's been very coy about how they are doing that, but that seems to be the case. And as Tom Harwood was pointing out then, there are dangers of that, of course, around higher interest rates. If Liz Truss is saying that higher interest rates are what are required for the economy, then I really do worry about mortgage holders, for example, all around the country. I'm really concerned that what Liz Truss is going to do is to lead us into this downward spiral and really make this cost of living crisis even worse by, quite frankly, having the wrong priorities.
Your answer to that, Nick, is to have the windfall tax on the profits of the oil and gas companies across the piece. Isn't that cupboard bare? I mean, you've been there once already, and so too has the government.
Well, it isn't bare. And by the way, the government certainly followed where Labour led on the windfall tax, but you can backdate it from May when Rishi Sunak introduced it, back to January when we were arguing for it. You can take away the so-called loophole that was in it, where companies were being given discounts for particular types of investment. So you can extend the windfall tax, and that is a much fairer way of doing this, rather than what Liz Truss seems to be doing, which is by this splurge of borrowing, which I worry will have the consequences of the higher interest rates that have been set out.
What are your plans? What are Labour's plans to help businesses with their energy costs?
Well, we've already set out that we will create a £1 billion contingency fund where there are businesses that use high energy. They can make immediate applications into it for assistance. Secondly, we've already spoken about helping smaller businesses by raising the threshold at which you start to pay business rates. But in addition to that, our plan going forward is to actually have a much wider reform of business rates to help our businesses up and down the country. So it's that combination of immediate help now, but also reform of business rates going forward.
Shift back to what your brief is, and to be honest with you and with our viewers, what we asked you to come on. You've been generous in your time giving us answers on those other important issues, but you are Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade. Our trading relationship with the United States, for as long as I can remember, has been hunky-dory, just fine. Is it such a big deal that we can't have an official document that says global trade deal between the United Kingdom and the United States? Does it really matter that much?
Well, Liz Truss herself said previously it mattered to the tune of £15 billion to our economy, which is what she said the gain would be to securing this comprehensive US-UK free trade deal. And this climb down today is frankly a personal embarrassment for Liz Truss. When she was International Trade Secretary in July 2019, she said securing this comprehensive trade deal was her main priority. She's spoken throughout of the benefits of doing it. She was also the Foreign Secretary in charge of the Northern Ireland Protocol negotiations, the conduct of which the President's spokesperson is saying is a roadblock to a deal. So I'm afraid the mess she finds herself in now is a mess of her own making.
A final one, and a quick one, if I may, Nick. I've interviewed here on GBNews Penny Mordaunt a couple of times when she was number 2 in international trade. And one of the key things that she was talking about was we may or may not get a full-blown deal with the United States, but she's been cutting deals sector by sector with state by state. And it might be legal work, soft stuff, service sector up in the northeast. I'm glad you're nodding. You obviously know what we're talking about. To what extent is that a new way of doing business? I know that Penny's now moved on to a different job, but you're now, having moved from home to this, you're the new expert for Labour on it. Is that just another way of doing the same thing?
No, I mean, of course, we want to see deals with individual US states, but that is no substitute for this comprehensive deal between the United States federal government and the UK government. And of course, there is a debate about precisely what the figure is that would be the benefit to our economy. But all the various figures point to the fact that failing to secure this deal, which was promised in the 2019 Conservative manifesto, is costing us money every day. And I'm afraid the blame for that lies squarely on the shoulders of Liz Truss.
Simmons, always good to talk to you. Thanks for finding time for us this afternoon, and thanks for being patient. Sorry we kept you waiting.
No problem at all. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Coming up on the show, we're going to be talking about how 6 million disabled people have received a one-off payment to help with the cost of living crisis. That's after a short break.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 24 minutes past 1. You're watching GB News TV and radio, and thank you very much indeed for so doing, with Gloria De Piero and me. Today we'll see some 6 million people receive a one-off disability payment of £150. Comes ahead of a so-called mini-budget this Friday, where Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng will lay out his plans to tackle the cost of living crisis for the rest of us. Here's Anna Riley, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter.
It's been announced today that up to 6 million people will be given a £150 one-off payment if they have a disability to help with the cost of living. I'm joined by Anastasia Tempest. She's got cerebral palsy and she uses an electric wheelchair. Anastasia, how is this £150 going to help you, and how have you seen your bills rise?
The bills have been rising since February, well, to be quite honest, since the war, as you know, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. What do you call it? Ukraine? Since then, you know, shot up to over £5,000, and what I've had to do, because I'm really, really worried. I mean, I have more electricity going out. the most people, because of the disability, the wheelchair, electric bed, heating, the washing machine, the dryer. In fact, because I don't have any social care, even though I qualify for social care, I can't get the support to have clothes hanging, get clothes hanging out, and it's just very difficult. I've had to contact one or two organisations, for example. Turn to Us is an excellent organisation. There was one particular charity gave me a small grant, which I appreciate very much. And what I've observed, actually, in terms of the cost of living, the people that are very supportive are the independent charities that tend to be supportive, whereas the government seems to be letting us down, and the people with disabilities are getting a really, really, really tough time, and the government haven't got a clue about the reality of what's happening on the front line. They should actually try and actually live my life. I've sent a little message on Twitter to Liz Truss, but as to whether she'll read it or not, I don't know, but it's deeply frustrating. I mean, I need to have money to be able to go out, for example, pop for a coffee, or, you know, just I can't just be existing. To exist isn't very good. I need to try and live some life, and at the moment I'm not living a decent life at all.
And this £150 then, what do you think to it?
Well, I mean, I appreciate the £150, of course I do, but it's not going to make a difference it's going to get lost, actually, the £150. In a bill that's so well over £5,000. So it needs to be doubled. There needs to be something like a reduction in VAT or some special money that is put aside for electricity bills. I mean, forget eating. We need to sort out the heating first. Of course, eating's important, but, well, they're both important, but, you know, in terms of fuel, that's the backbone to many situations, because if you haven't got fuel, then you can't prepare a meal.
So definitely a tough time. Thank you for sharing there. So Anastasia is of the view she appreciates that £150, but she thinks more needs to be done by the government, and we'll certainly see later in the week on Friday what that mini budget has in store for us with the cost of living.
Anna Riley there. It's so important to bring those real-life stories to make sense of these announcements. Next up, we'll be discussing the return of politics as the Prime Minister faces a tough week in Westminster. She'll be tackling the NHS backlog and soaring energy bills. That's after your news update.
Good afternoon, it's 1:29. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Liz Truss says negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US will not restart for years. The Prime Minister made the admission as she flew to New York to speak at the United Nations General Assembly ahead of a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Mr. Biden has stalled on trade negotiations and expressed concerns that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. The Prime Minister has also pledged to give at least £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine next year. Liz Truss says the UK will match or exceed the record support given to President Zelensky's troops in their fight against Russian aggression. The royal household is observing a week of mourning following the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Flags across the UK are now flying at full mast, but they'll remain at half-mast on royal estates, and family members aren't expected to carry out any official duties during this period. The Culture Secretary says the latest figures suggest around 250,000 people filed past the Queen's coffin whilst it was lying in state. The parents of Madeleine McCann say they're disappointed after losing a case against a former Portuguese policeman who claimed they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was the result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detective's claims. The McCanns say they only took action to protect the search for their daughter. Around 6 million people with disabilities will receive a one-off payment of £150 today. The money is part of a package of support to help those struggling with the cost of living crisis. The majority of those eligible can expect the financial boost by the start of October. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. In just a moment, it's back to Gloria and Alistair.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 25 to 2. You're watching GB News TV and radio with Gloria and with me. As we were hearing just before the break from Anna and her guest, there has been a one-off cost of living payment for disabled people living in the United Kingdom, which some, of course, say is not enough.
Well, on Friday, Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng will be unveiling that long-awaited mini-budget and giving more details about the government's energy support package.
Well, joining us in the studio now is GB News business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. We were saying just before we started that £150, it depends very much who you are and if you really are on benefits and the rest of it. Every little helps. But although that's great for disabled people, it's only one tiny piece of a big jigsaw that will be unfolding over the next few days.
It will. On Friday, Alistair, we expect to have confirmed that the average household dual gas and electricity fuel bill will be capped at £2,500. Now, how do you cap an average? That's because the average, the unit of electricity price is capped. So if you use more, if you're a bigger household, it'll be more than £2,500. If you use less, it will be significantly less. Huge confusion about that across the media. Very few people bother to explain it, but of course we do here on GB News.
I got a nightmare feeling that there are folk out there who think, whoever they are, they're not going to have to pay more than £2,500.
Yeah, that's right.
Simply not.
And there are other folk thinking, well, they'll only be paying only £1,000, but they think they're going to pay £2,500, even though they don't even put the heater on. So what's going to happen on what we know from today, as Anna Riley reported there, is that these £150 disability living allowance top-ups are being distributed. From today, everyone, the 6 million people roughly who are eligible, should have that extra payment in their accounts by the end of the month. So says the Department for Work and Pensions. But of course, this comes on top of a whole load of other assistance and benefits. Many, even combined, some people may think it's inadequate. We've got means-tested benefits coming through, top-ups from Rishi Sunak's last budget in the spring. God, that seems like years ago.
Back in May.
Yeah, back when we were lads. On top of that, though, you've also got the energy support package coming through. It's not just about that cap for households and maybe for businesses. We discussed that a few hours ago, didn't we? It's also a £400 grant, a one-off. This is money for you. You don't have to pay it back for all households. That's controversial because even well-off households get that. On top of that, there's on average £650 of assistance for fuel bills for families qualifying for certain benefits, like means-tested benefits, housing benefit and so on. And then in addition to that, there may be other benefits around the edges. But even with all these benefits, it's going to cost a lot of money and people are still going to be paying a lot more than they normally do for their fuel.
And she is widely trailed anyway that she will cut taxes, or Kwasi Kwarteng in her name, will be cutting taxes on Friday. The Prime Minister says there is no doubt that cutting taxes will grow the economy. Is it that certain?
It isn't certain at all. There's also, it isn't certain the impact on the public finances of cutting taxes. Some people would argue that you actually generate more tax if you cut the tax rate because there's more activity. Others would argue the opposite. And this is at a time when interest rates on government debt are going up a lot because the government's borrowing heavily. It has to pay more for that borrowing. And as taxpayers, we all have to pay that back to those businesses and pension funds and often overseas entities that have invested in that government debt. So there's an awful lot of uncertainty. And this is going to be a very, very significant budget, even though it's a mini budget, as the government says we must call it. We've had controversy, haven't we, because the head of the Treasury Select Committee, the chair, Mel Stride, very respected Labour MP, he says quite reasonably...
Conservative MP.
Tory MP. He says quite reasonably that the government should be saying to the Office for Budget Responsibility, put out these estimates, show us, independently if you think our financial models are working and if we're being responsible. By calling it a fiscal event / mini-budget, the OBR isn't statutorily obliged to produce those forecasts. The reality is there's huge uncertainty. Just one little scintilla of uncertainty I'd put in here. We are seeing in the newspapers and elsewhere a lot of estimates that this massive energy support package is going to cost the same as furlough. Furlough cost about £70 billion, 70,000 million. This could cost 100 or 150 billion. Yes, it could. The cost could spiral out of control. But if wholesale energy prices come down, the cost of delivering energy at that capped rate becomes a lot less. And wholesale energy prices, gas on Western European markets, is actually down around 40% over the last few weeks. So all this is in the balance. There's a lot of risk, there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's going to be a great deal of controversy around Friday's mini-budget.
Yes. The Office of Budget Responsibility, independent, impartial, which Mel is talking about, saying that they should cast an eye over this thing. And we know from other think tanks out there, not least the Institute of Fiscal Studies.
Very respected.
Very respected, very independent, all have their doubts. The Truss camp come back and say, but that's the old Treasury orthodoxy. This is a brand new game. We're doing something very, very different. And therefore, there's no point in saying what might the economy look like in 12 months because it's going to be so fundamentally different. Are they trying to get away with murder or have they got a point?
I think there's certainly a debate to be had. I know being an economist who's often, criticised in the public realm, the IFS, the OBR, I know all the people at the top of them, they're decent people, decent economists in the Treasury, but they do have a way of thinking, and it is an orthodox way of thinking, and they often make huge mistakes, it has to be said. Back in the 80s, Reaganomics tore up the economic textbooks because he was cutting taxes and getting more tax revenue through the door. And I think that is part of the inspiration for what Liz Truss is saying. On the other hand, it is a risk. Some people would say, even though this government policy is risky, borrowing loads of money in order to provide energy support for households and indeed for firms, to do nothing would be riskier still.
It's that weird coincidence as well, isn't it, between the political calendar, the election cycle, and the economic calendar and economic cycle.
Well, in my view, when economics gets really tasty, it just trumps all politics. It totally upends politics. It did when...
Was that unintended?
But does any leader, Prime Minister, want economics to be tasty? Because isn't that dangerous territory if economics is tasty?
And I use that word advisedly.
Yeah.
The politics is going to get really quite confrontational in the weeks and months to come, driven by the economy. Industrial relations is going to get confrontational as these pay review body assessments come through.
But also, as Nick Thomas Simmons, the shadow international trade secretary, was saying to Gloria and me just a little while ago, what you said in the past is also going to get very, very tasty. And he said Truss promised absolutely that there would be a trade deal with the United States. Truss now says there probably won't be. And he quoted Liz Truss as having said, it's worth 50 billion quid. So if you don't get a trade deal with the Americans, then you lose £50 billion.
It's right. Liz Truss understandably said that when she was the Trade Secretary, when she was going around the world securing a lot of trade deals for the UK that a lot of people said she couldn't secure. And for the most part, she secured them. Of course, keeping on with the food analogies, a trade deal with the US is the big enchilada because the US is, even without a trade deal, still our biggest single country trading partner by a long way. And we haven't had a trade deal with them for more than 50 years. Why? Because the EU doesn't have a trade deal with the US. If we do get a trade deal, it's a bonus. It's not necessary to keep trading with the United States. We trade massively with the US. That will continue. That point isn't made nearly enough.
No, all over social media by people that you and I both know, and I'm sure Gloria as well, in the business world, saying, been all right recently, not doing too badly, thank you. Don't worry, do not panic.
I've learned a lot, as I always do from Liam, but I'm now hungry. All this talk of, being tasty and enchiladas.
You can always rely on Halligan for an enchilada. Or making arguments like a sandwich. Great to see you, buddy.
Cheers.
Now, as we've been discussing, Liz Truss had only been Prime Minister for a matter of days before the death of Queen Elizabeth II.
But with the period of national mourning over, the focus is now back on Westminster and the cost of living crisis. It's set to be a crucial week with Liz Truss at the UN Assembly and that mini-budget that we've been discussing on Friday.
Well, political correspondent, Whitehall correspondent, I do beg your pardon, Tony, for The Telegraph, Tony Diver joins us now. After the recent sombre atmosphere, how will the coming week in politics play out? Slowly but surely, or bam?
Well, we've got three big events, haven't we? We've got tomorrow, we think there's going to be more support for businesses. We're going to get a bit more detail on how exactly the government is going to save businesses from high energy prices. Then we've got an NHS announcement from Therese Coffey, the new Health Secretary, the next day. And then on Friday, as you say, we've got this mini budget. So, I mean, it does seem slightly as if all of this stuff's been stored up and it's all going to come at us in one go. And, in Westminster today, political journalists are spending their time trying to find out what's going to be in these announcements. As you said, we do have a fair amount of detail on the energy package already. I mean, it's substantively already been announced. There's some more detail on businesses to come. But there certainly are some bits and bobs left to be cleared up. And I think this is sort of Liz Truss's first opportunity since the energy crisis to showcase what she's got from a policy point of view. I mean, at the moment, she's been doing sort of the stateswoman leadership crisis acts that we've seen, while the Queen's funeral has been going on, and now it's kind of back to business, I think.
Business, because there's inter-party arguing. The Conservative chairman of the Treasury Committee has demanded an OBR, Office of Budget Responsibility forecast, alongside that fiscal event, mini-budget, whatever you want to call it. The Conservative chair of that committee says we need to look at the figures, we need to look at the books. Problematic.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, and you would expect him to say that, I suppose. You would expect someone in that position to want there to be more scrutiny of what the government's going to announce. I think it's fair to say in Downing Street there is a fair amount of scepticism about the OBR anyway. Now, obviously, the arguments given by Number 10 is to do with timing and the fact that it's not a proper budget. It's only a sort of minor fiscal event, and so it doesn't need the same level of scrutiny as you would normally have for a budget or a spring statement. But I think it is fair that at the top of government at the moment, there is a feeling, and it comes back to what Liam was saying just now about orthodoxy. There is a feeling that the OBR is actually not really any better than the Treasury at this stuff. Is it truly independent from the Treasury? Is it truly independent of government? Does it have the same problems in terms of civil servants who think in a certain way and act in a certain way? There will probably be a feeling in Number 10 that actually it's not really worth getting them to do it anyway, particularly as you look at the last OBR forecast. Earlier on this year, understated the amount of money that the government was going to collect in taxes by several £billion. In fact, actually more than the £12 billion that they're getting out of the national insurance rise. So, perhaps had they got it right, then we may not have needed a national insurance rise in the first place. That is the sort of thinking, that, not my view, but that is the sort of thinking that's going on in Number 10, and I think it's therefore no surprise that they're not exactly bending over backwards to be scrutinised by that same organisation.
When I finally got your title right at the very beginning, Whitehall correspondent, I do apologise again for that, but it does make a very important distinction in the sense that you're not just a political hack looking at the manoeuvrings between the parties and indeed within the parties over these things. You do report on Whitehall as a function of government, all of those government departments up and down, then all on Whitehall, they're all over the place these days. But it's worth reminding folk at home that it's not just Liz Truss, new Prime Minister, it's a new government. I think that Liz is the only member of the Cabinet who served in Cameron's government.
Yes.
At every level, it's virtually new faces, new readers begin here. What does it look like to you as an expert on the functioning of government?
Yeah, well, it's always a very interesting time when that happens, because you see, particularly if you've got a junior minister who's been promoted to Secretary of State level, or you've got someone who's been sitting on the back benches who's not actually been served in the cabinet before, civil servants will immediately start to sort of get a sense of what it is they're after, what they're interested in, what the priorities are, how much of the stuff that was going on under the old administration can carry on again, and all of that sort of work that rumbles on in the background, like you say, that we don't really see in the daily cut and thrust of politics. We don't hear about it at Prime Minister's questions. We don't that much read about it in the newspapers, to be honest, because a lot of this stuff happens behind closed doors. There will be a bit of a reckoning that's happened, I suspect, over the period of mourning that we've just had, where civil servants and ministers are coming to terms with the fact that they've now got to work with each other. I thought it was interesting. There was an interesting piece in the New Statesman this afternoon about the work that Kwasi Kwarteng, the new Chancellor, has been doing behind the scenes. Clearly, he's been using this period of mourning as an opportunity to think deeply about the government's economic policy. We know before that there was a lot of tension between Number 10 and Number 11 at both official level and also a political level, as you're saying. So it looks as if that relationship is going to be a little easier with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, but there is always a sort of slight period of I don't know what you call it, a period of people getting used to each other when this stuff happens. And, it's not really an ideal time given the crisis that the country's facing.
Tony, final question to you. This is Liz Truss's first time on the world stage as our Prime Minister. Is it possible to know what success looks like? How do you measure success for a Prime Minister on the world stage?
Well, it's worth remembering that Liz Truss has got quite a lot of experience doing this stuff because of her previous job as Foreign Secretary, and so a lot of the people she'll be meeting at UNGA this week will be people that she already knows or she's had some relationship with or knew their Foreign Secretaries, even if they're heads of state. I think one of the most important things to come out of this week is the relationship between her and Joe Biden, and we already think that might be quite a difficult relationship because of his views on her work in the Foreign Office on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Joe Biden, of course, has Irish ancestry. Irish politics is quite important in Westminster. There's a lot of Irish lobbying that goes on. So, it's fair to say that will be at the top of his agenda. And if she can come away from this conference having given the rest of the world an idea that actually the special relationship is still fully intact and that she can work with Joe Biden, then I would say that's a huge success.
Kenny Diver, Whitehall correspondent of the Daily Telegraph. Thank you very much indeed. Really enjoyed that conversation. Thanks for fitting us into your busy afternoon.
Well, Liz Truss has said the UK next year will spend at least £2.3 billion on military aid to assist Ukraine against Vladimir Putin's invasion.
Now, that's going to match what was already being spent in military aid to Ukraine in 2022. And it's being seen by some as a necessary expense to defend Ukraine's sovereignty. But how will it affect the UK economy amid a cost of living crisis?
Joining us now is macroeconomist Philip Pilkington. Hello, Philip. Just reflecting on Liz Truss's words, she says soaring energy bills are a price worth paying to secure the UK's long-term security. Is she right? Do you agree?
It depends on how long we can pay them for. I think one of your guests said that the energy price cap is going to cost twice what the furlough did. And the furlough was one of the biggest economic programs this country has seen since World War II. So how long exactly can we continue to pay for this? £150 billion this year. There's a lot of talk about city analysts, who are effectively the people who judge whether the UK debt is sustainable or not. They're getting very nervous about this. Deutsche Bank 2 weeks ago raised the possibility of a sterling crisis if the balance of trade continues to deteriorate. And Goldman Sachs are projecting 22% inflation in 2023. That's more than double what it is now. So I just ask, how long can this go on for?
And if the Treasury is to throw its orthodoxy map out of the window and go with what Liam was talking about as Trussonomics earlier on, she started with fireworks, hasn't she, by sacking the permanent secretary at the Treasury, the guy who is supposed to keep that side of things on the rails.
Well, yes, I feel really sorry for anybody having to deal with policy right now, because you're making choices in an environment that you don't fully control. The energy crisis and so on is due to a war in Eastern Europe. And this war is causing all these effects of rising energy costs, and it's requiring a response from the people who are trying to make plans. So they're really making plans around this energy crisis. But as I said, the costs of this are really getting extortionate at this point, and the people who are accepting government debt in financial markets are getting increasingly frayed by it.
As you were finishing that answer there of President Zelensky in Ukraine, as it happens with Ursula von der Leyen, the final point, and it does fit into that kind of macroeconomic pattern of financial policy, borrowing and all of the rest of it. There's a very strong sense that Truss had to deliver a lot of money to Ukraine for overtly political reasons, to show to folk that she was the rightful successor to Boris Johnson, Zelensky's big pin-up. But it's still a lot of money, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I think that we should be taking these economic decisions a lot less lightly and treating them like political symbolic issues. I saw one of the guests you had on earlier was a disabled woman who was worrying about how to keep the electricity on this winter. This seems to me a lot more important than kind of global stage posturing, in a sense.
Great to talk to you, and thank you very much indeed for putting those big numbers on Ukraine, but also the macro picture in a macroeconomic context for Gloria. Good to talk to you. Keep in touch with us, Philip. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
You have been getting in touch with your thoughts on Liz Truss saying a US-UK trade deal is currently out of reach. Mike says we will just have to wait until Donald Trump becomes president again in 2 years. Biden is anti-British anyway. We should have had Trump at the Queen's funeral. At least he was pro-United Kingdom.
Smith says the government's recent admittance or perhaps admission, that a US trade deal with the United States is basically not on, can be summed up in a one-word name, actually, and that is Biden. The so-called special relationship, that's 2 words, Smith, is a myth. It's never existed. The US always looks after number one. 100% right on that, and we should do the same. In spades.
Godfrey says we don't need a US trade deal. We need instead to sort the Northern Ireland Protocol. Truss should suspend all checks between the UK and Northern Ireland.
I think that's a fascinating one to end on, because I think, in a sense, he or she is right, that we don't actually need that trade deal with the United States, but we do need to sort out Northern Ireland for our own people, but also for legal reasons.
Yes, but the tensions on that, it seems to be that they don't want to go all all-out war, that they want to try and talk reasonably on that. Coming up, we'll be live in New York as Liz Truss prepares to speak at the UN General Assembly, and we'll be speaking to a former president of Ukraine about the positive news in the fight back against Russia's invading forces. Before that, the weather.
Hello, fairly quiet weather conditions for the rest of today and in fact into tomorrow as well. Quite a lot of cloud around, but there will be some brightness before the evening is done in places as that cloud just breaks up at times. And the reason for the quiet weather is this area of high pressure dominating the weather across the UK at the moment. We do, though, have this weather front just skirting along the far northwest of Scotland at times, bringing thicker cloud here with some outbreaks of rain at times, and also quite breezy conditions. But elsewhere through this evening and overnight, patchy cloud coming and going. Where we do have some clearer spells, we could see some mist and fog patches developing as well. Not a particularly cold night for most of us, but if we do get some lengthy clearer spells in the countryside away from the towns and cities, we could see a few places dropping into single figures. So for tomorrow, a cloudy start to the day for many, if not a little bit of mist and fog around. There could be some brightness at times through the morning, but cloud will tend to thicken as the day progresses. Perhaps, as was the case on Tuesday, just about thick enough for the odd drizzly shower in places, but it will be dry for the majority of us. Still, this weather front close to the northwest of Scotland bringing thicker cloud here with some outbreaks of rain, which will become a little bit more persistent and heavier as the day progresses, as that weather front starts to make inroads across the UK, slowly but surely moving its way southeastwards through the latter part of the week. So for Wednesday night into Thursday, it's a similar story. Patchy cloud, a little bit of mist and fog developing, and this thicker cloud in the northwest with outbreaks of rain. And then, as I mentioned, the story for the latter part of the week is that this weather front makes slow but steady progress southeastwards. So for Thursday itself, there will be some cloud and rain in the north and west of the UK, and that migrates its way south and eastwards through the rest of Friday and into Saturday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. It's just slipped easily past 2 o'clock and you are watching Gloria De Piero and me on GB Newsday at GB News TV and radio, bringing you the very latest news and analysis. And here's what's coming up this hour.
Liz Truss is in New York for the UN General Assembly, marking her first foreign trip as Prime Minister. The situation in Ukraine is set to be high on the agenda, and we'll be crossing to New York live for the latest.
However, one of the things that will not come from the visit to New York is a UK-US trade deal, which Liz Truss has said could be years away with, quotes, no negotiations taking place. We'll be speaking with independent economist Julian Jessup about what the consequences of that might be.
Liz Truss will pledge at the UN summit to meet or exceed the £2.3 billion of military aid spent on Ukraine in 2022 in the next year, doubling down on her support for Kyiv after Russia's invasion. We'll be speaking live to former President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, on what this aid money means for the country. That's after the latest news.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister will discuss the situation in Ukraine at the UN General Assembly in New York, with the first session just about to get underway. She's also due to hold bilateral talks with leaders at the event. Earlier, Liz Truss admitted that negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US won't restart for years. President Joe Biden has stalled on trade negotiations, expressing concerns that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. Shadow International Trade Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds says it's a major failure for the Prime Minister.
This climb down today is frankly a personal embarrassment for Liz Truss. When she was International Trade Secretary in July 2019, she said securing this comprehensive trade deal was her main priority. She's spoken throughout of the benefits of doing it. She was also the Foreign Secretary in charge of the Northern Ireland Protocol negotiations, the conduct of which the President's spokesperson is saying is a roadblock to a deal. So I'm afraid the mess she finds herself in now is a mess of her own making.
The parents of Madeleine McCann say they're disappointed after losing a case against a former Portuguese policeman who claimed they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was the result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detective's claims. The McCanns say they only took action to protect the search for their daughter. Around 6 million people with disabilities will today receive an automatic one-off payment of £150. The majority of those eligible can expect the financial boost by the start of October. Work and Pensions Secretary Chloe Smith says the payment is part of a support package to help those struggling with the cost of living crisis.
We acknowledge that these are worrying times for households, and in particular for disabled people who do, of course, face additional costs. We understand that, and that's why we're acting. So the government has made sure that there is at least £1,200 of support going to the most vulnerable households. The payments we're talking about this week will be arriving automatically, which I hope again is some reassurance to people. And that is in addition to what we're now setting out to support people with the costs of energy.
Migrants have crossed the Channel into UK shores again this week after a 4-day break due to bad weather. A group have been seen in Dover for the first time since last week, when 600 people arrived on Thursday alone after windy weather put a brief hiatus on crossings at sea. It takes the number of arrivals this year to almost 30,000, which, according to government figures, is higher than the whole of last year. A coroner has offered his deepest sympathies to the family of Molly Russell, who took her own life after watching content on social media which raised concerns. The 14-year-old looked at tens of thousands of online posts before she died in November 2017, including material which was linked to anxiety, depression and self-harm. An inquest which reopened this morning is considering whether algorithms contributed to her death. The RMT union has announced its members are set to strike across the rail network on the 1st of October. The 24-hour walkout is the latest industrial action in an ongoing row over job security, pay and working conditions. Union officials say the move will bring the railway to an effective standstill. It comes as members of the ASLEF union announced train drivers across 12 companies will strike on the 1st and 5th of October. The Labour MP for West Lancashire has announced that she's standing down, triggering this year's 5th by-election. In a statement, Rosie Cooper said she'd accepted the role of chair of Merseycare NHS Trust. It comes 3 years after a neo-Nazi was jailed for plotting her murder. Miss Cooper is standing down despite securing re-election for the next general election. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, back to Gloria and Alistair.
It is 6 minutes past 2. I'm Gloria De Piero with Alistair Stewart today. Liz Truss is meeting with US President Joe Biden and other world leaders at a UN General Assembly in New York.
In her first foreign trip as Prime Minister, Liz Truss will focus on the war in Ukraine and the global crisis in food security. It all comes as political duties resume here at home after the period of national mourning for the late Queen.
Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in New York to tell us more. Darren, what is our new Prime Minister hoping to achieve over in New York?
Well, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it, Gloria, when you step back and think about it. It is 2 weeks ago today since Liz Truss became Prime Minister. That speech in Downing Street feels like a lifetime ago, and lots of politics, you've rightly pointed out, has effectively been put on hold during that national period of mourning. But that has very much now come to an end with the funeral of the Queen yesterday. And politics is back to normal, frankly, in large degree. Liz Truss, as you say, is in New York. She arrived here late last night. This is her first trip, the first foreign trip as Prime Minister. Now, she's attending the UN General Assembly, the 77th UN General Assembly. That is an annual event in which all the leaders from across the world get to address the United Nations. Liz Truss will be doing that tomorrow night. It is also a chance, though, frankly, to try and catch up with lots of world leaders who are also here in this city. And she's got a lot of bilaterals, actually, over the next couple of days, not least of all with the French President, Emmanuel Macron, the President of Lithuania, the Prime Minister of Spain, Ursula von der Leyen from the EU Commission, and of course Joe Biden, the US President. Now, that was due to happen in Downing Street, of course, on Sunday, but got cancelled. Top of the agenda is, unsurprisingly, Ukraine. Liz Truss overnight announcing that there would be continued military and economic support for Ukraine in the weeks and months to come, particularly as that war seeps into the autumn and to the winter. And also lots of talk, of course, about energy security. And she's been talking this morning about how energy security and those higher energy bills are frankly a price worth paying, she says, in order to ensure that we're not reliant on Russia into the future for oil gas. She accepts that it does mean economic pain at home, but her insistence means that we will not be reliant on those authoritarian regimes. She said it is right that we cannot jeopardize the security for the sake of cheap energy. This was a mistake that the entire Western world made.
How tricky is it going to be for Prime Minister Truss to square things with Emmanuel Macron, who, as candidate Truss, she said, well, the jury's out on whether he's a good guy or not?
Yeah, indeed, that might make for a little bit of an awkward opening to that bilateral meeting later on today. Must be said, though, I think Emmanuel Macron has certainly warmed himself, if you like, to the British government and indeed to the British public in the last couple of weeks with some of his condolences to Her Majesty the Queen. He came up with that those very nice words, didn't he, Alistair, about 10 days ago, saying that while she may have been your queen, i.e. our queen in the UK, she was the queen to the rest of the world. I suspect Downing Street has somewhat rowed back from that. They have emphasised what a good partner and ally France are. Of course, one of our closest neighbours, NATO members, I'm sure in the end Liz Truss probably regrets slightly making those remarks. But there is a lot of stuff on the agenda. You touched upon it in the news bulletin there. Brexit, the Northern Ireland Protocol, that still is unresolved. Liz Truss insisting she wants to see a compromise deal, while at the same time saying that she could still invoke Article 16 if necessary. How would the EU react to that? Could Britain afford it given the dire economic circumstances that the country potentially faces in a couple of months' time? And then you add to that, lots of the other news agenda around today. That meeting with President Biden tomorrow. Liz Truss making it clear today that she thinks a trade deal with the United States is not going to happen anytime soon. In fact, it's going to be years down the line. She said that there isn't currently any negotiations taking place with the US, and I don't have any expectation that that's going to start in the short to medium term. She said instead she's focusing on a comprehensive and progressive agreement with the Trans-Pacific Partnership that includes countries like Canada, Japan and Australia. So that US trade deal being knocked off, it's a pretty big blow. As a former international trade minister, she talked about how important a possible trade deal with the United States would be. Joe Biden clearly not very keen on it. Northern Ireland and that protocol and Brexit makes it a lot more difficult politically. So there is a lot on Liz Truss' plate here in New York. And all this, of course, while the focus will remain at home as we wait that mini budget at the end of the week on Friday. And Liz Truss again suggesting this morning that there will be announcements in that mini budget and in the weeks to come that might not be popular with the public, but she insists are necessary to get Britain back to economic growth.
It does feel like we're seeing big ideological dividing lines back in party politics again, doesn't it, Darren?
Yeah, it does. We've genuinely got a big split at the moment between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party and what they think is right for the future of the country. Let's say, look at that windfall tax on energy companies. Liz Truss is very clear. She is not a big fan of that, even though, as Labour point out, the energy companies are raking in billions of pounds in unexpected extra profits, and that is a real dividing line because Labour clearly would tax those energy companies. Also comes to the tax cuts themselves. Labour think this is the wrong time to do it, that the country simply cannot afford it. Liz Truss's argument is that it is entirely necessary if we want to see growth back to actually good standards, because it's been pretty anemic over the last decade or so. So we are seeing these really, really big political dividing lines. At least in terms of rhetoric. All I would add, Gloria, though, is in the end, when you actually look at what's happening, Liz Truss talks about she is a Conservative leader, wants to rule as a Conservative Prime Minister, that she's a low-tax Conservative, and we will see some of that on Friday. Don't get me wrong, there will almost certainly be tax cuts on Friday. Yet at the same time, given the situation we find ourselves in, this government is about to embark on the biggest state intervention in the energy market we have ever seen. We're spending potentially over £100 billion to ensure that people don't go cold this winter. So in the end, yes, ideological to a degree, but the government willing to use the state and use it big time when necessary.
Quick one, Darren. Relevant back to where you are in New York at the for the United Nations meeting. We're going to be talking about Ukraine next on the programme. And of course, I read this morning that whether he's leading the Russian delegation or whether he's merely a part of it, but Sergei Lavrov will be there. Another person with whom Liz Truss has not always had the warmest of relationships, shall we say.
No, indeed. And there was, of course, that visit, wasn't there, at the start of this year, in which it was felt by some that Liz Truss was somewhat humiliated by the Russian foreign minister, though Liz Truss argued that she went there to stand up to Russia. But yes, Ukraine will dominate here. Liz Truss is going to visit the Ukrainian centre here in New York. She's going to meet actually with the First Lady of Ukraine as well over the next 2 days. But yet the big question, of course, is for the West is how far are they, and this has been a continuing question, how far are they willing to go in terms of supplying those necessary weapons and aid to Ukraine? Clearly they've done a lot so far. It's helped change the tide, many would say, in recent weeks. But it is that fine balancing act where Russia repeatedly are pretty insistent, actually, in recent months, that if they do overstep the mark, the West, that there will be ramifications. Though clearly the message from leaders here is that they won't bow to that pressure and that they have Ukraine's back 100%.
Darren, great talking to you live from New York there. And keep in touch. Lots and lots happening over the next few days. We'll be back in touch with you very often and frequently. Darren McCaffrey there for GB News, political editor in New York. And just while Darren was coming to the end of those observations, we put up the live pictures of what's going on in the United Nations right now, live. And that was Gutierrez. And there he is again, the Secretary General. This is one of the two big events for the United Nations, the General Assembly, where pretty well every country in the world that is a member of the United Nations will be there. It's not the Security Council, much smaller body. This is the general debate. And just remember, this is the first time Liz Truss will be there as Prime Minister, having merely been Foreign Secretary the last time she was there.
Now, the UK will match the support it has provided to Ukraine this year in 2023, next year. That's what Liz Truss has pledged. The Prime Minister is expected to use the trip to New York to underscore the UK's long-term commitment to Ukraine, whilst also stressing the need to remove energy dependence on Russia.
Well, this follows Ukraine's successful counterattack in the east of the country in recent weeks, forcing Russian troops to retreat. And today, the UK's Ministry of Defence has said that Russia has withdrawn submarines from its Black Sea naval headquarters in Crimea, coming after a drone strike on the base back in August.
We can now speak to the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, who is, of course, backing the Ukrainian forces. Good to see you. What does it mean to hear our new Prime Minister express her steadfast support to you in economic terms as well as terms of solidarity?
Thank you very much indeed for the invitation. And first of all, I want to convey my sincere condolences together with the all Ukrainian people, to all the British people, to the whole world, with the such an events as Queen pass away. I have an opportunity to meet her several times, and this is the very great leader of the whole epoch. For the Liz Truss, I have also a great opportunity to cooperate with her on her position of the Foreign Secretary. She demonstrates absolutely effective support of Ukraine during this war. I just want to remind you that this war is 8 years, more than 8.5 years already. And with that situation, we think that we enjoy the bipartisan support of the British Parliament and the great support of the British government. And we definitely want to invite her to visit Kyiv, and I hope she will pay the visit among the first her foreign visit after returning back from New York from United Nations General Assembly. Point number two, we are very much appreciative of the decision which published today about the British government for supporting Ukraine for £2.3 billion for year 2023. I just want to say that this is mostly not an economic support, but the military support, and this is exactly what we need now, because this is the shortest way to the peace. More weapons, this is the shorter way to the peace, because otherwise it would be victory of Russia. And I'm just returned back this morning, a couple of hours ago, from the south of Ukraine, from Kherson region, on the border with the Nikolaev region. And I just want to say the words of the Ukrainian soldiers, which definitely thank our partners from US, from UK, from NATO, for the artillery, for the ammunition, for the drones. They kindly asked the anti-aircraft missiles. This is definitely vital, because a lot of the Russian bombers and jet fighters is in the air. I saw it with my own eyes. They want to thank for the HIMARS. This is also extremely efficient. And with that situation, I think that the factor of the successful counterattack is just two. First, This is the bravery, professionalism of the new Ukrainian armed forces, which was created in the year 2014. And I'm proud that me as a Supreme Commander-in-Chief Ukrainian Armed Forces start to create it based on the NATO standard. And point number two, this is the counter-offensive operations start to be possible only because of the Western assistance.
Well, Mr. Poroshenko, let me butt in. I apologise. I would wait for you to finish that very important thought there, not least what you've seen and witnessed there in the south of the country. There's quite a strong feeling here as well that in pledging that at least £2.3 billion, Liz Truss is also sending a very important message to some other European leaders. Don't get wobbly now. You may be German, you may be suffering the energy crisis even more than we are. You guys in Ukraine, if that battle is to continue to be as successful, needs everybody stepping up to the plate. Are you worried of others maybe going a little wobbly?
Look, I'm an optimist. And I think that the whole world now understands that fight in Ukraine, war in Ukraine, when Ukrainians bravely counterattack Russian troops, we fighting not only for Ukraine, we're fighting for the whole Western world, for the whole Western values. And when we're talking, and I support the message from Liz Truss, this is just the message: help us to save you, help us to stop the Russian troops. It would be better do it on Ukrainian territory than to let them go to the NATO member states. And point number three, this is important, the message about the military assistance, but also the message from the British government, British Prime Minister. Hopefully it happened during her visit here. It would be the message for the possible investment, because everybody now believes that Ukraine will win and the victory would be with Ukraine. But the investment help us to provide reforms and helping us to return Ukraine back to the European family. That would be the vital for us. So 2 points. First, this is the Deputinization of the Europe, Deputinization of the world, and the strong unity of the Western world. And second message is the strong solidarity with Ukraine, exactly what British government, British people demonstrate, no matter under the time of my great friend Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, since he was a Foreign Secretary, and Liz Truss, who is extremely clear, extremely straightforward with the support of Ukraine. And even now, when she is in New York, I think that would be extremely important to have some different other initiative, including the message for nuclear security of the world. And with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is 10 times more powerful than Chernobyl, and which is now under occupation of the Russian troops who are trying to blackmail the whole world with the nuclear terrorism, definitely we need a decision for the special peacekeeping operation based on the decision of Security Council of United Nations, who would stay there and guarantee the nuclear security of the world.
Poroshenko, thank you very much indeed for your time and that very clear, loud and clear signal of gratitude to Liz Truss and her government, but a very loud and clear message to the rest of Europe as well. Good to talk to you. No, I'm afraid we can't because we're coming up to the half hour, but I promise faithfully we'll book you again soon. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Take care of yourself, sir, and thank you for your time.
Thanks. Thank you.
So, as you've been hearing, Prime Minister Liz Truss has said that a post-Brexit trade deal with the US is out of reach for the moment. Is that a blow for Britain, or do we hinge too much on the prospect of a deal with the United States? We'll be discussing that after a short break.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. Exactly 27 minutes past 2. You're watching GB News, TV and radio with Gloria De Piero and me, Alastair Stewart. Prime Minister Liz Truss has admitted that a post-Brexit trade deal with the United States of America is out of reach for now and will take many years to pull off.
She is set to meet with US President Joe Biden today in New York at the UN General Assembly. She's since said that her number one issue for discussion with Biden is global security and that we can collectively deal with Russian aggression.
Well, joining us now on the programme, I'm delighted to say, is Julian Jessup, who is an independent economist, but a man who has worked at the pounding heart of government as well. Julian, always a pleasure to see you. I'm going to play devil's advocate. I have never been utterly persuaded of the huge merit of a big trade deal with the United States of America, because we seem to be doing perfectly well for quite some time without it. But Nick Thomas-Symonds for Labour said, well, Liz Truss herself said it mattered. Therefore, if she's now saying it's off the agenda, we do have a problem. What's your view?
Well, it's certainly disappointing that we're not making rapid progress on this, but also it's not surprising for two reasons. One is economics. The Biden administration, like many Democratic administrations in the US, is, I think, inherently protectionist and unenthusiastic about free trade. So we may need to wait for a more sort of pro-free trade, perhaps a Republican administration in the future to do this deal. The other point is political. In the short term, the Biden administration has the excuse of the problems over the Northern Irish Protocol and the tensions between United Kingdom and Europe as an excuse to delay progress on its own trade deal with the UK. So I think those are the background facts to it. But I also agree with you. It's not a disaster. It's disappointing, but not a disaster. Partly because we already do an enormous amount of trade with the US. Ironically, because it's already one of our biggest single trading partners and a major investment partner, the additional gains from doing a trade deal are relatively limited. Instead, the bigger prizes are from faster-growing countries in the emerging world in particular, and in the Asia-Pacific region. So if we end up spending more time doing deals with them instead, then I think the long-term economic benefits would be even bigger.
Looking at the Conservative Party manifesto in 2019 at the last election, we aim to have 80% of UK trade agreements within the next 3 years, starting with the USA, Australia, New Zealand and Japan. Was that manifesto commitment a mistake then?
Well, it was an aim, I think, rather than a sort of formal commitment. But we've got almost all of those. I mean, we've got New Zealand, Australia.
Well, if everything in a manifesto is an aim, then we can put them all in the bin.
I love an economist who can smile.
Sorry, Julie, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's no problem. I mean, totting up the numbers, actually, in terms of the additional benefits, then getting trade deals done with countries in the Asia-Pacific region and other dominant emerging markets are going to be far more important than the additional trade we're going to get from the US. Realistically, you can't negotiate all trade deals at once anyway. Remember that as a member of the European Union, we couldn't negotiate our own trade deals. So we don't have the expertise that we might otherwise have done. So if we end up cutting our teeth, if you like, on smaller deals in Australia and New Zealand and then rolling those out into the bigger deals in the rest of the Asia-Pacific region, then I think that's not a bad outcome.
And also, Julian, on that, talking about smaller deals, and I want folk at home to be crystal clear that you were talking about smaller deals with other countries like Australia. But you and I have discussed in the past what Penny Mordaunt was trying to do when she was number 2 in the International Trade Department, and that was to go across to the United States of America and cut state-by-state deals. And people say, oh, but that's not a deal with America. Well, you know, if you've got a third or half of the really vibrant US states that have got big economies, you are making progress, but in a different way.
That's right. I mean, you can do different types of deal. What we're not going to get is sort of one big deal between the UK government and the US government covering large parts of the economy. That's the thing that's off the table at the moment. But it doesn't prevent us from doing smaller deals with individual states on areas, for example, like public sector procurement, where I think the UK would have a lot to offer. But also there's still the possibility of doing smaller deals with the US itself, you know, bilateral deals in particular areas of common interest where, you know, the economic and political fallout of doing a deal will be much less, but there's still some quite substantial benefits to gain. So I wouldn't say the door is closed completely, but I think we probably will end up looking for bigger gains elsewhere.
It is genuinely always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. An economist who knows everything that everybody out there needs to know and can still deliver it with a smile occasionally. Julian Jessup, thank you as always for your time.
Coming up, a number of arrests have been made following tensions between Hindu and Muslim groups in Leicester. We'll have an update on that story after your news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:32. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister will discuss the situation in Ukraine at the UN General Assembly in New York, with the first session now underway. Earlier, Liz Truss admitted that negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US won't restart for years. President Joe Biden has stalled on trade negotiations, expressing concerns that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. The RMT union has announced its members are set to strike across the rail network on the 1st of October. The 24-hour walkout is the latest industrial action in an ongoing row over job security, pay and working conditions. Union officials say the move will bring the railway to an effective standstill. It comes as members of the ASLEF union announced train drivers across 12 companies will strike on the 1st and 5th of October. Migrants are trying to cross the Channel again after a 4-day break, pausing because of bad weather. A group was brought ashore in Dover for the first time since last week, with more than 600 people being intercepted on Thursday. It takes the number of arrivals this year to almost 30,000, which, according to government figures, is higher than all of last year. The parents of Madeleine McCann say they're disappointed after losing a case against a former Portuguese policeman who claimed they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was the result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detective's claims. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere. Alistair and Gloria will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It is. Oh,
I thought I was going to
I'm
do
going
that.
to, beat
Well, no,
you for
do
reading
it,
the
because
time.
you'd have
You
got
do
the
it
time
now.
right.
You do it.
I can't read 24-hour clock. Is that 25 to 2?
It's 2:37 exactly.
23.
47 people have been arrested as part of an operation to deter further disorder and violence in Leicester.
Now, it follows tensions involving sections of the Hindu and Muslim communities over the weekend after a Pakistan versus India cricket match escalated into violence.
Police faced significant aggression to deal with the crowds, and temporary Chief Constable for Leicester, Rob Nixon, said officers had been brought in from all sorts of different parts of the country to help with the operation.
Well, joining us live now in the studio is GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. We talked about this a little bit earlier on, and the degree to which we need to be crystal clear. You've been talking to people in the security forces, police force and the rest of it. How you go from a punch-up after a cricket match, where clearly one side was happy with the result, the other wasn't, and it is then becoming something that is seen as being real tension between two ethnically and religiously diverse communities.
Yes, and there have been long-running tensions there, and it doesn't actually take much to spark trouble, which is, on this occasion, been the aftermath of a celebration following India's defeat of Pakistan on the 28th of August that resulted in fights and disturbances in the north and east of Leicester. And that bubbled on, really, for a good couple of weeks until we got a really bad weekend this past weekend, which meant that police resources that were committed to covering the royal funeral, Leicestershire and surrounding forces contributing to the effort down in the capital.
I butt in really to say people who are listening to us on radio rather than watching on TV, the bright yellow day-glow coats, police, show in numbers.
Yeah. Well, initially, of course, on Saturday, when quite a lot of trouble broke out, there was only 8 police officers, and there's been some criticism of the fact that only 2 arrests were made on Saturday. But when you've got 8 police officers dealing with several hundred people who are involved in violent disorder, they're not going to be moving in and arresting people at that time. They just want to keep people apart and try and keep people safe, including themselves. They got additional, what we call mutual aid, from elsewhere in Leicestershire and from other force areas. As I say, these were resources that should have been better employed down in the capital, dealing with what was a mammoth security operation around the Queen's funeral there. But they couldn't do that. They were pulled back to supplement those officers in Leicestershire and deal with this disorder. And the hope is that this will have been the last of it, that it reached a peak at last weekend. But actually, as I say, it has been bubbling on for a couple of weeks, and anything could happen in the days and the weekend ahead.
And the Mayor of Leicestershire, Sir Peter Soulsby, or is it Leicester, said community leaders were baffled by the events, believing they had been fanned by some very distorted social media. And a lot of people that we're seeing on these pictures, they came from outside. Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, there is no doubt that social media played a big part in it, but this happens so often now. When events happen, they trigger other events because people get a distorted view of what's happened.
Do you mean specifically in Leicester or more generally?
No, generally on anything.
It's really interesting, and I need butt into because Gloria and I were talking about it before we came in at the beginning of this whole programme 2.5 hours ago. A mutual friend of ours, Fiona McTaggart, lovely woman who was Labour Member of Parliament for Slough, had a long chat with me ages ago about exactly the same thing happening in Slough, where the two communities would travel out, a bit like the Mods and Rockers in the 60s, out of London, have a pitched battle, and then thank you very much, they'd done, and back they'd go again. I mean, they didn't have social media in those days to organise it, but it was the same problem.
And we saw in the digital age the first real manifestation of this in 2011. You remember following the police-involved fatal shooting of Mark Duggan in Tottenham in North London. Then people were on BlackBerry messengers, and they were sending messages out to other people right across the capital and elsewhere, saying, you know, this has happened, this is wrong, we need to meet, we need to show force against the police. And they were actually orchestrating and organising a lot of the disorder through the BlackBerry Messenger. Well, of course, since then, we've got the advent of the smartphone that everybody has, so ubiquitous now. And with that comes the video messages. And what happened on the 28th of August was we're told that there were several hundred Hindu heritage young men who were out and about in the east of Leicester, who were celebrating and shouting and chanting and getting up to general disorder. But on the videos that were posted on social media, there were quite a few slurs, you know, ethnically motivated and religiously motivated slurs that went out that, again, riled people within the Pakistani community. And then lots of people came in, and then it just escalated from there. Social media is a big part of this. It's a tool that people use. They can more readily pass messages, air their grievances, and sadly organise these types of events and react to things that they perceive to be wrong, you know, happening on these the video posts that they get.
Mark, thanks for casting important light on that. It's tricky, it's messy, it's not good, but we do need to, all of us, try and understand what lies behind it and how it's incited as well.
Exactly, and Peter Soulsby, who I was quoting earlier, he's the Mayor of Leicester. I just wanted to make sure I give him his correct title.
Quite right,
since
too.
I quoted from him.
Mark, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Mark, there, our Home Affairs and Security Editor.
Now, a mini-budget to deliver tax cuts promised by Liz Truss during her Tory leadership campaign will take place on Friday. The new Prime Minister has vowed to cut taxes to boost the economy and help people with rising living costs.
Well, we spoke to the Shadow International Trade Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds, about all of that a little earlier today. We also asked him about Liz Truss admitting that there will be no big UK-US trade deal. There may be not even negotiations going forward, and he said that was a big miss.
Liz Truss is saying that higher interest rates are what are required for the economy, then I really do worry about mortgage holders, for example, all around the country. I'm really concerned that what Liz Truss is going to do is to lead us into this downward spiral and really make this cost of living crisis even worse by, quite frankly, having the wrong priorities. The government certainly followed where Labour led on the windfall tax, but you can backdate it from May when Rishi Sunak introduced it back to January when we were arguing for it. You can take away the so-called loophole that was in it, where companies were being given discounts for particular types of investment. So you can extend the windfall tax, and that is a much fairer way of doing this, rather than what Liz Truss seems to be doing, which is by this splurge of borrowing, which I worry will have the consequences of the higher interest rates that have been set out. Liz Truss herself said previously it mattered to the tune of £15 billion to our economy, which is what she said the gain would be to securing this comprehensive US-UK free trade deal. And this climb down today is frankly a personal embarrassment for Liz Truss. When she was International Trade Secretary in July 2019, she said securing this comprehensive trade deal was her main priority. She's spoken throughout of the benefits of doing it. She was also the Foreign Secretary in charge of the Northern Ireland Protocol negotiations, the conduct of which the President's spokesperson is saying is a roadblock to a deal. So I'm afraid the mess she finds herself in now is a mess of her own making. Of course, there is a debate about precisely what the figure is that would be the benefit to our economy. But all the various figures point to the fact that failing to secure this deal, which was promised in the 2019 Conservative manifesto, is costing us money every day. And I'm afraid the blame for that lies squarely on the shoulders of Liz Truss.
Nick Thomas-Symonds there, Labour's Shadow International Trade Secretary, and joining us live now in the studio, once again, I'm delighted to say, is GB News political reporter Catherine Foster. When you were last here, we were talking about Truss and all of her ministerial team hitting the ground running. Labour not far behind.
No, absolutely not. And the Labour conference coming up this week.
Singing the national anthem to start with. My goodness, that'll be fraught with them.
Oh, they've been reading the Times.
Maybe some tension in the hall.
Isn't it interesting? But they've obviously realised, Labour, that they have to show that they are patriotic. We've seen this huge outpouring of love and unity around the Queen. And I think appealing to those red wall voters, if they want to have any hope of winning them back, they need to do it. And they need to, I was reading a piece this morning about it, saying even Jeremy Corbyn, when he was asked about getting rid of the monarchy, had sort of said, well, we're not going to do it.
It's not a priority.
You know, so,
Clement Attlee was a celebrated monarchist.
Exactly.
Well, I think people would say Tony Blair was, wouldn't you?
He's certainly wearing all the regalia when he was at the funeral yesterday. Very smart badge of honour.
Since we've been on air, a couple of political stories have developed. First of all, we have heard more rail strikes announced. Just tell us about the date and the politics behind those, because Grant Shapps, who was no longer in post, but he was criticised for not negotiating directly with the unions. What sort of approach will we see from the new government?
Well, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who has now come in as Transport Secretary, is taking a much more conciliatory line in saying that she is going to be having meetings. That doesn't substantively change anything, though, I don't think necessarily, but she's making more moderate noises. We want to sort this out. So there's been an announcement that train strikes by various unions, including the Train Drivers Union, will go ahead on October the 1st, also on October the 5th. It's likely to impact the Conservative Party conference. It's also likely to impact hundreds of thousands of people across the country. And of course, it's just the latest in a series of strikes that began this summer and are set, no doubt, to continue. But they're saying that 1st of October will be the biggest one yet in terms of the number of unions, the number of railway workers involved.
Fascinating, that shift from Grant Shapps to Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the new Transport Secretary. And we were talking again before about how these things do chop and change. But one step back into that, during her leadership campaign, which she won to become Prime Minister, clearly, Liz Truss also had a big chunk in the speech that she delivered at each hustings and at each big event, which was unfinished business of reforming the trade unions, unfinished business about how many votes, what percentage of support you had to have before you did a strike, not least the transport unions.
Yes, absolutely. She will be keen, and it will be fascinating to see how it unfolds, to really crack down on these unions, as the government sees it, bringing the country to a standstill at will.
But presumably Anne-Marie wouldn't be conciliatory without the boss's licence.
No, but I think her sounding conciliatory is more tonal than actually necessarily meaningful, because they will not want to be seen to bow down, because that sets a dangerous precedent.
Vital distinction.
Let me just ask you about that other story that was developing while we have been on air. The chair of the Treasury Select Committee, Mel Stride, is a Conservative MP, but of course it's a cross-party committee, saying on Friday, when we get that mini-budget, it should be accompanied with growth forecasts, etc., the things you normally get alongside a proper budget. What will the government say in response to that? I can't see any comments so far.
Well, the government's view is that the OBR forecasts take about 10 weeks to properly organise and come up with, and that obviously, given this regime has only been in power for a fortnight and 10 days of those have been, you know, dealing with the death of the Queen, that simply isn't possible in this time frame. And that action is needed now, because, as we know, the weather's changing. We're starting to get colds, people thinking about putting the heating on. These big decisions are needed now, and they can't afford to wait 10 weeks for the OBR to get this all together. So they're going to go ahead, and we'll get a budget probably in November. We'll probably get a spring statement. They have to have 2 fiscal events per year that the OBR
I love
will...
it. It's the economics and politics of walking a tightrope, isn't it?
Exactly. But I think there will be big announcements, and they're saying, you know, bigger probably than we're expecting. Obviously, a lot of it's been widely trailed, but there may be more to come that we don't know about.
We'll be covering it all on Friday as it happens, won't we?
Yep, indeed. Catherine, thank you very much indeed for the time being.
Wow.
Now, from a constitutional turning point witnessed by emperors, presidents and prime ministers to a moving family affair, yesterday's state funeral yielded much pageantry and much raw emotion.
GB News' Cameron Walker looks back at the historic state funeral for the Queen.
An event planned for decades, but military precision all came down to this moment. A final farewell to a queen who reigned over us for more than 70 years. Her Majesty's coffin was taken in procession from Westminster Hall, where thousands had filed past to pay their respects, in the state gun carriage of the Royal Navy, pulled by 142 Royal Naval ratings. A tradition dating back to the time of Queen Victoria. At the King's request, the wreath on top of the coffin contained flowers from the gardens of Buckingham Palace, Clarence House and Highgrove, rosemary for remembrance, and myrtle, the ancient symbol of a happy marriage, used in the Queen's own wedding bouquet in 1947. A handwritten note from the King read, "In loving and devoted memory," signed Charles R. A life of service was accompanied by a life in the public eye. Members of the royal family, their dignity and stoicism shone through in the face of unimaginable grief. Princess Charlotte's choice of brooch in the shape of a horseshoe was gifted by her great-grandmother, the Queen. She, alongside her future king brother George, processed behind the coffin with their parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Her late Majesty famously declared on a 21st birthday broadcast that her whole life would be dedicated to serving the nation and Commonwealth. Rarely has such a promise been so well kept.
The Queen was consulted on all of the funeral plans. The hymn you're hearing was played at the Queen's wedding to Prince Philip in 1947. Mounties of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police led the procession from Westminster Abbey to Wellington Arch. Crowds shared in the King's grief, witnessing him and members of his family march behind his mother's coffin. A state hearse brought the Queen's coffin for the committal service at Windsor Castle. More than 800 people, including the Queen's personal staff, filled St George's Chapel. In stark contrast to Prince Philip's funeral, where just 30 people could attend because of COVID restrictions. The imperial state crown, the orb and the sceptre were removed from the coffin and placed on the high altar. The king then placed the Queen's camp colour of the Grenadier Guards on the coffin. The wand broken, creating the symmetry with the 3 instruments of state being removed, ready to be passed on to their successor.
But the merciful goodness of the Lord endureth for ever and ever upon them that fear him.
The Queen was buried with her late husband Prince Philip in a private service. Royal mourning continues, grieving together as a family. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Thank you for being with us, me and Alistair, today. Stay with us because up next with GB News Live will be Patrick Christies.
Bye-bye.
Hello, fairly quiet weather conditions for the rest of today and in fact into tomorrow as well. Quite a lot of cloud around, but there will be some brightness before the evening is done in places as that cloud just breaks up at times. And the reason for the quiet weather is this area of high pressure dominating the weather across the UK at the moment. We do, though, have this weather front just skirting along the far northwest of Scotland at times, bringing thicker cloud here with some outbreaks of rain at times and also quite breezy conditions. But elsewhere through this evening and overnight, patchy cloud coming and going. Where we do have some clearer spells, we could see some mist and fog patches developing as well. Not a particularly cold night for most of us, but if we do get some lengthy clearer spells in the countryside away from the towns and cities, we could see a few places dropping into single figures. So for tomorrow, a cloudy start to the day for many, if not a little bit of mist and fog around. There could be some brightness at times through the morning, but cloud will tend to thicken as the day progresses. Perhaps, as was the case on Tuesday, just about thick enough for the odd drizzly shower in places, but it will be dry for the majority of us. Still, this weather front close to the northwest of Scotland bringing thicker cloud here with some outbreaks of rain, which will become a little bit more persistent and heavier as the day progresses, as that weather front starts to make inroads across the UK, slowly but surely moving its way southeastwards through the latter part of the week. So for Wednesday night into Thursday, it's a similar story. Patchy cloud, a little bit of mist and fog developing, and this thicker cloud in the northwest with outbreaks of rain. And then, as I mentioned, the story for the latter part of the week is that this weather front makes slow but steady progress southeastwards. So for Thursday itself, there will be some cloud and rain in the north and west of the UK, and that migrates its way south and eastwards through the rest of Friday and into Saturday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Yes, this is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christies, on TV, radio and online until 6 o'clock. And I've got loads coming up for you today. Will our new Prime Minister Liz Truss shine on the global stage? She's in New York for the UN General Assembly. And of course, this is her first foreign trip as Prime Minister. On the agenda are spending commitments to Ukraine and plans for trade deals, including with the United States. We will cross live to New York for the very latest on that. And it's a blow for the parents of Madeleine McCann after they lose a court challenge over claims in a Portuguese police detective's book that they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. Goncalo Amaral, who made the claims, was originally the lead detective on the case, but he was removed after criticising British police. What next for the couple after losing their appeal? And 47 people have now been arrested as part of an operation to deter further disorder and violence in Leicester. There's been tensions between the sections of Hindu and Muslim communities over the weekend after, ridiculously, a Pakistan versus India cricket match escalated into violence. Good grief. Can our cities in the UK be truly cohesive in a diverse community? I'm going to get stuck right into that and revisit that on numerous different points throughout the show, actually. We cannot continue to have this kind of lawlessness on our streets. But before we get stuck into every single one of those top stories, it's your latest news.
Good afternoon. It's 3:01. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says the UK's security can't be jeopardised for the sake of cheap energy. Liz Truss, who's pledged at least £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine next year, says the West must continue to stand up against Russian aggression. She and world leaders will discuss the war at the UN General Assembly, which is now underway in New York. Former Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko has welcomed the UK's support.
I just want to say that this is mostly not an economic support, but the military support. And this is exactly what we need now, because this is the shortest way to the peace. More weapons. This is the shorter way to the peace, because otherwise it would be victory of Russia.
The Prime Minister is also due to hold bilateral talks with leaders at the two-day event in New York. Earlier, Liz Truss admitted that negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US won't restart for years. President Joe Biden has stalled trade negotiations after expressing concern that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. Shadow International Trade Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds says it's a major failure for the Prime Minister.
This climb down today is frankly a personal embarrassment for Liz Truss when she